A sheikh cries at his wife's grave, but a waitress who was watching went to him and revealed something incredible. Comment, saying what you thought of this story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and comment which city you're watching me from. I really want to know if you like my story, and I want to get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain beat against the mirrored windows of the commercial building in Midtown Manhattan, as if it wanted to break not just the glass, but also the invisible barrier that Julian Croft had built around his heart over the past 2 years. 42 years old, black hair with silver threads at the temples, amber-colored eyes that had seen both fortune and tragedy in equal measure, he remained motionless before the massive mahogany desk in his 30th floor office, observing the frantic movement of the city that never stopped. New York City pulsed below like a gigantic heart, but inside Julian's chest there was only silence. The intercom rang for the third consecutive time, the secretary's voice echoing in the austere environment decorated with Persian rugs and contemporary art. She said, "Sir, the meeting with the Gulf investors is scheduled for 3 in the afternoon. I need to confirm your attendance." Julian pressed the button without looking away from the window. He told her to confirm it and to cancel all appointments after 5. It was Thursday, and Thursday meant only one thing: the Elysian Club, his only concession to socialization since Eleanor was gone. The memory of his wife still visited him in the most unexpected moments, like a delicate fragrance that lingers in the air long after the flowers have withered. Eleanor, with her dark eyes and shy smile, had been chosen for him by their families in a tradition that went back generations in their elite circle. What began as a brokered union blossomed into genuine love. Or at least, that's what Julian believed he had felt. Now, 2 years after the accident on the FDR Drive, he was no longer sure of anything, except for the guilt he carried like a stone in his stomach. At 7 in the evening, after a meeting that yielded $50 million contracts, Julian went home only to change clothes. The triplex apartment on the Upper East Side was too quiet, each room echoing with memories he preferred not to revisit. The decor remained exactly as Eleanor had left it: hand-embroidered silk cushions, photographs of her family in Damascus, the grand piano she played on Sunday afternoons. Everything untouched, like a shrine for someone who would never come home again. The Elysian Club functioned as a parallel world where social rules relaxed under the influence of imported whiskey and low lights that turned banal conversations into whispered confessions. Located on a discreet street on the Upper East Side, frequented by the New York elite who preferred sophistication to ostentation, the club offered the kind of atmosphere where Julian could sit alone without anyone daring to bother him. His reputation preceded him. The Sheikh, as he was known in business circles, was not a man for small talk or fake smiles. Chloe Evans knew every regular client at the club, their habits, their quirks, their preferences in drinks and company. In 3 years of waiting tables at the Elysian, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read people, a skill that protected her from unwanted advances and helped her maximize the tips needed to support her family in the Bronx. But the man at table 17 was always an enigma. Julian Croft arrived promptly at 9, ordered the same chilled Scotch whiskey, remained in absolute silence for 2 hours and 15 minutes, and left without speaking a word to the stunning women who frequently approached his table, only to be dismissed with a cold glance. The first time she served him, Chloe felt something different. It wasn't the predatory gaze she knew so well, nor the arrogance disguised as charm that emanated from most of the wealthy men who frequented the club. It was sadness, a sadness so deep she could almost touch it, as dense as the smoke from the cigar he never lit but always kept between his fingers. His amber eyes seemed to carry the weight of some irreparable loss, and when she approached to serve his drink, he thanked her with an automatic courtesy, as if she were a ghost passing by his table. Chloe couldn't explain why that man aroused her curiosity. Perhaps it was because she recognized something familiar in him, the loneliness of someone fighting ghosts from the past. She knew that struggle herself, the daughter of Sarah Evans, a woman who had cleaned the houses of the New York elite for 20 years, and John, a mechanic retired on disability after a work accident. Chloe grew up knowing that every opportunity had to be won with twice the effort. A full scholarship to study English literature at Hunter College was just the beginning of a journey that included night shifts in telemarketing and now nights at the Elysian Club. The difference between her and the other girls who worked at the club was stark. While her colleagues dreamed of snagging a rich client for a life of luxury, Chloe saw each shift as a means to an end, paying her mother's medical bills, who had developed diabetes and needed expensive medications, and saving money to get a master's degree that would finally get her out of that life. She didn't despise the work, but she knew she didn't belong to that world of appearances and veiled transactions. On the night of October 15th, a Thursday especially cold for New York standards, Julian's behavior changed subtly. Chloe noticed that he drank more slowly, that his eyes stared into the void with a different intensity, that his hands trembled almost imperceptibly as he brought the glass to his lips. It was the second anniversary of Eleanor's death, but she didn't know that. She only knew that something was different about the man who had always intrigued her. When he stood up to leave shortly after 11, as he always did, Chloe made a decision she couldn't explain even to herself. She asked to leave early, making up an excuse about her mother not feeling well, and discreetly followed the black Mercedes that was pulling away from the club. She didn't know why she was doing it, what mysterious impulse was, leading her to worry about a complete stranger, but something inside her said that man shouldn't be alone that night. The car stopped at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. Chloe remained outside the gates, watching Julian's silhouette head towards a more private section of the cemetery. She saw him kneel before a white marble tomb, saw his shoulders slump under an invisible weight, heard the distant echo of words whispered in a language she didn't understand. It was the first time she had seen that powerful man show any kind of vulnerability, and the sight moved her in a way she hadn't expected. When the rain began to fall harder, turning the dry earth to mud, Chloe made another impulsive decision. She jumped the low cemetery wall, a skill she had developed in a rebellious adolescence in the outer boroughs, and walked silently among the ancient trees until she was close enough to hear the broken words Julian directed at the tomb. He was speaking English now, his voice choked with a pain she had never witnessed before. "Forgive me, Eleanor. Forgive me for not insisting you stay home that night. Forgive me for letting work consume me so much that I didn't even notice you needed me. Forgive me for being alive while you—" His voice broke, and Chloe felt tears well up in her own eyes. There was the explanation for all that sadness, for the loneliness that emanated from him like a magnetic field, repelling any approach. It was then that the words left her mouth before she could stop them. "She wouldn't want to see you suffering like this." Julian startled, turning his body quickly to find the source of the voice. Under the faint light of a nearby lamppost, Chloe looked like an apparition, her curly brown hair wet from the rain and her eyes shining with genuine compassion. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating. "How dare you?" he began, his voice loaded with fury at the invasion of privacy, but something in her expression stopped him. There was no morbid curiosity in her gaze, no condescending pity. There was only pure humanity, the recognition of a wounded soul by another who understood pain. "I work at the club where you go every Thursday," Chloe said, taking a step forward. "I've watched you for 3 years. I can see that you carry a great pain, but I can also see that you are a good man, and good people don't deserve to carry guilt for tragedies they couldn't control." The words hit him like a lightning bolt, too precise to be casual, too true to be ignored. Julian studied the young woman's face before him, trying to understand what kind of person would follow a stranger to a cemetery just to offer comfort. She wasn't the type of woman who frequented his world. There were no expensive jewels, designer clothes, or the flawless makeup that characterized high society ladies. But there was something in her eyes that touched him more deeply than any artificial beauty ever had. "Why did you follow me?" The question came out softer than Julian intended, but the unexpected presence of this woman had broken something in his emotional armor. Chloe hesitated for a moment, searching for words to explain an impulse she didn't fully understand herself. "Because I recognize pain when I see it," she finally answered, wiping the rain from her face with the back of her hand. "And because no one should be alone on a night like this." She gestured discreetly toward the grave. "She was important to you." Julian nodded slowly, as if the words cost him physical effort. "Eleanor, my wife. It's been 2 years today." His voice carried a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue, an exhaustion of the soul that Chloe recognized from her own battles against adversity. "Do you want to talk about her?" The question surprised them both. Julian didn't talk about Eleanor with anyone, not even with the therapists his family insisted he see. But something in the sincerity of this young woman made him consider the possibility for the first time in 2 years. They walked to a nearby bench, sheltered by the leafy canopy of an ancient tree. The rain continued to fall, but it seemed less intense there, as if the cemetery itself offered a refuge for long-suppressed confidences. Julian began hesitantly, describing how he met Eleanor in a match arranged by their families, how she was delicate and shy, how he gradually fell in love with her genuine kindness. "The night she died, we had a silly argument about me working late again," he confessed, the words coming out like a confession in an invisible courtroom. "She wanted us to go out to dinner, said we needed to talk about something important, but I had a meeting that couldn't be postponed, international contracts that depended on that night. She left angry, driving in a terrible storm." His voice broke again. Chloe listened in silence, not offering empty consolations or trying to minimize his pain. Her presence was like a silent balm, allowing Julian to externalize a guilt that had been eating him from the inside for 2 years. When he finished speaking, she remained quiet for long minutes, respecting the weight of the revelations. "Can I tell you something about me?" she asked, softly. Julian nodded, curious about the life of the woman who had appeared like a guardian angel on his darkest night. "I grew up in the Bronx. My dad was a mechanic until an accident left him with a bad back. My mom has been cleaning houses for as long as I can remember. I've always had to fight twice as hard to get half of what other people got for free." She told him about the night spent studying by candlelight when the power was cut, about the borrowed books from the public library that opened her mind to worlds beyond her neighborhood, about the full scholarship to college she won with grades few could achieve. "I work at the club because my mom developed diabetes. The medications cost almost $2,000 a month. But I don't see myself as a victim of life, you know? I believe that every difficulty teaches us something about our own strength." Chloe's words touched something deep in Julian. Here was a woman who had faced adversities he couldn't even imagine, yet radiated an inner strength that contrasted dramatically with his own resignation in the face of tragedy. "How do you manage to keep that hope?" he asked, genuinely intrigued. "Because the alternative is to give up," she answered simply. "And giving up means that all the people who believed in me, my mom, my teachers, even some of the clients at the club who treat me with respect, invested in vain. I can't do that to them. Not to myself either." The conversation stretched into the early hours of the morning. They talked about philosophy, about the books Chloe devoured during her work breaks, about the trips Julian had taken around the world, but that had never really touched him because he was always worried about business. There was an intellectual connection that surprised them both. She, used to being underestimated because of her background, discovering she could discuss complex ideas with one of the country's most cultured businessmen. He, realizing he had found a brilliant mind hidden behind a waitress's uniform. When they finally said goodbye, near 5 in the morning, something fundamental had changed between them. It wasn't just attraction, though there was a palpable tension in the air whenever their gazes met. It was a mutual recognition of souls who had found something rare, genuine understanding. In the days that followed, Julian found himself constantly thinking about Chloe. During the endless meetings in his office, while signing million-dollar contracts that were once his only passion, his mind would wander to the memory of the rain hitting the canopy of the tree while she spoke about hope as if describing a scientific fact. It was the first time since Eleanor's death that he felt curiosity about another person, the first awakening of something he didn't even dare to call romantic interest. Chloe, for her part, fought against feelings she knew were dangerous. During her shifts, at the club, when she saw Julian at his usual table, she could perceive subtle changes in his behavior. He no longer seemed completely isolated in his bubble of sadness. Sometimes, when she approached to serve his drink, their gazes would linger a little longer than courtesy required. There was something new growing between them, but she was smart enough to understand the dangers of this situation. The transformation became more evident when Julian began to break his rigid routine. Instead of leaving promptly at 11:15, he started staying until the club closed, always finding an excuse to talk to Chloe during her breaks. They talked about literature, about the social injustices she observed daily, about the philanthropic projects of the foundation he maintained in Eleanor's memory, but managed in a completely detached way. "Why did you create the foundation?" Chloe asked during one of these late-night conversations as they were arranging chairs after the club closed. It was a question no one had asked before. Everyone assumed it was just a way to honor his dead wife's memory. Julian stopped what he was doing, considering the answer. Eleanor always talked about making a difference in people's lives. She visited orphanages, organized fundraising campaigns. After she died, I created the foundation because I thought it was what she would have wanted. But I confess I've never really gotten involved. I just transfer money and let other people handle the details. That's not honoring her memory, Chloe said softly but firmly. That's just clearing your conscience. If she really cared about these causes, she would want you to get truly involved, to understand why these people need help. The words were like a slap in the face, but a necessary one. Julian realized he had just been fulfilling superficial obligations, as if charity were a tax to be paid for his wealth. Chloe continued, "There's a family in my neighborhood, Mrs. Davies, and her 5 children. Her husband died of cancer because he couldn't get treatment in time at the public hospital. She works 16 hours a day cleaning houses to support the kids, but she still can't afford private school for them. The older sons are already getting involved with gangs because they see no other way out. That's the reality your foundation should be touching." The raw and honest description made Julian see his own hypocrisy. He donated millions to social causes, but he had never really seen poverty up close, never understood that behind the statistics were real people with names, stories, and dreams cut short by circumstances beyond their control. "Take me to meet this family," he asked impulsively. "I want to understand." Chloe hesitated. Taking one of the richest men in the country to the Bronx was risky for several reasons. First, his security. A black Mercedes would attract unwanted attention in an area with gang activity. Second, the community's reaction. Many would see her association with a wealthy businessman as a betrayal of her own people. Third, and perhaps most importantly, her own increasingly confused feelings for him. "Are you serious?" she asked, studying his face for signs that this was just the superficial curiosity of a bored rich man. "Completely," Julian replied, and there was something in his amber eyes she had never seen before, a determination that went beyond guilt or social obligation. "If I'm going to truly honor Eleanor's memory, I need to understand the world she wanted to help change." And so the following Saturday, Julian found himself in completely foreign territory, driving a borrowed Civic through the narrow streets of one of New York's toughest neighborhoods. Chloe had insisted he leave the Mercedes at home and dress in simple clothes, jeans, a t-shirt and sneakers, to avoid drawing attention. Even so, his erect posture and the way he observed everything around him betrayed his privileged origins. Mrs. Davies' home was a two-room apartment where 6 people lived. When Chloe introduced Julian as a friend who works with social projects, the 50-year-old woman welcomed him with the warm hospitality that is a hallmark of such communities. She offered coffee brewed in an aluminum pot, introduced the children who were home, told her story without self-pity, but with the dignity of someone who fights every day to keep her family together. Julian listened in silence, observing the details he had never noticed in his foundation reports. The creativity with which Mrs. Davies had turned milk crates into shelves for her children's school books, the pride with which she showed her youngest daughter's drawings tacked to the peeling wall, the way the older boys talked about their dreams of becoming an engineer and a doctor, even knowing the difficulties they would face. When they left the house, 3 hours later, Julian was transformed, not by the tourist experience of seeing how the poor live, but by the profound understanding that he had found a human richness there that his money could never buy. "How can I really help?" he asked Chloe as they walked through the streets back to the car. "I don't know if you can," she answered honestly. "Not in the way you're used to, just by writing checks. Real help means understanding that these people don't want charity. They want opportunities. They want their children to have access to quality education. They want to work with dignity. They want to be seen as complete human beings, not as pity cases." Chloe's words echoed in Julian's mind all the way back. For the first time in years, he felt he had a purpose beyond simply keeping his businesses running. But there was another feeling growing in parallel, one that scared and thrilled him at the same time. He was falling in love with this extraordinary woman who had just revolutionized his worldview. The discovery happened on a grey November Tuesday when Chloe rushed to Bellevue Hospital after receiving a desperate phone call from her younger sister. Sarah Evans had collapsed at work in the house of an elite family where she had been cleaning for 15 years and had been rushed to the emergency room. When Chloe arrived at the hospital, she found her mother conscious but visibly weak, her glucose levels completely out of control. "Your mother needs to be admitted immediately for a series of tests," explained the attending physician, a young man with deep, dark circles that betrayed consecutive shifts. "Her diabetes is very severe, without proper treatment." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Chloe understood the gravity of the situation from his tone of voice and compassionate gaze. The problem was the usual one: money. The public health system offered treatment, but the waiting list for the specialized tests Sarah needed was months long. The most effective medications were not available. Private treatment would cost a fortune the family could never afford. Chloe felt the familiar weight of helplessness, the feeling of always chasing solutions to problems that seemed larger than her possibilities. It was in this moment of despair that Julian appeared at the hospital. He had noticed Chloe's absence from the club for 3 consecutive days, and after a discreet investigation with other employees, found out about Sarah's hospitalization. When he found Chloe in the hospital corridor, sitting on a plastic chair with her eyes red from crying, he felt his heart tighten in a way he hadn't experienced in years. "What are you doing here?" Chloe asked, surprised and embarrassed. She was still dressed in her club uniform from the night before, her hair disheveled without makeup, vulnerable in a way she rarely let others see. "I heard your mother was sick," Julian replied, sitting in the chair next to her. "I came to see if you needed anything." The simple answer hid a more complex truth. Julian had spent the last 3 days thinking about her obsessively, worried about her sudden absence, discovering that his feelings had evolved far beyond friendship or gratitude. When he learned about Sarah, his first reaction was to act, to use his power and influence to solve the problem, because the idea of Chloe suffering was unbearable. "I don't need anything you can offer," Chloe replied, sharper than she intended. His presence there in the midst of her family crisis left her confused and defensive. "This isn't your problem." But Julian had already made his decision. While Chloe was in the room visiting her mother, he spoke discreetly with the hospital administration and arranged for Sarah's immediate transfer to Mount Sinai Hospital, where she would have access to the best endocrinology specialists in the country. When Chloe found out what had happened, her reaction was explosive. "How dare you do this without consulting me?" She confronted him in the hospital parking lot, her voice trembling with indignation. "Who do you think you are to make decisions about my family? Someone who cares about you," Julian replied, maintaining his calm in the face of her fury. "Your mother needs care that she can't afford. I can provide that care. What's the problem? The problem is that you're trying to buy me," Chloe exploded. "You're trying to turn me into another one of your charity obligations. I'm not a social project to ease your guilty conscience." The words hit Julian like slaps, but he recognized the painful truth behind the accusation. In part, his impulses really came from a desire to help, but there was also the unconscious need to feel needed, to use his power to create an emotional debt that would ensure Chloe's presence in his life. "You're right," he finally admitted. "I was selfish. But your mother needs help, regardless of my motives. Don't let your pride stop you from accepting what she needs to survive." The argument lasted for more than an hour, right there in the parking lot, under the curious gazes of nurses leaving their shifts. Chloe oscillated between gratitude and humiliation, between the relief of knowing her mother would get the best possible treatment and the feeling of having lost her independence. Julian, for his part, began to understand that loving Chloe meant respecting her autonomy, even when it went against his protective instincts. "If I accept this," she finally said, her voice calmer, "it has to be a loan. I will pay back every cent, even if it takes years." "That's not necessary." "It's necessary for me," Chloe cut him off. "It's the only way I can live with myself." Julian agreed, understanding that this was the only way she would accept the help. But there was something more happening in that conversation, an intimacy forced by the conflict that was bringing them dangerously closer. When their tempers finally calmed, they found themselves looking at each other with a new intensity, charged with a sexual tension that neither of them had openly acknowledged until then. "Why did you really do it?" Chloe asked softly, no longer angry, just genuinely curious. "Because I can't imagine a world where you're suffering, and I have the power to prevent it," Julian answered with brutal honesty. "Because you've become important to me in a way that even I don't fully understand." The confession hung between them like a dangerous bridge that neither knew if they should cross. Chloe felt her heart race, not just from the intensity of the moment, but from the sudden realization that her own feelings had evolved far beyond the initial compassion she had felt for that wounded man in the cemetery. In the days that followed, as Sarah recovered quickly with the first-rate treatment at Mount Sinai, Julian and Chloe began to meet outside the club. They were casual encounters, a walk in Central Park, a coffee in a discreet bakery in Greenwich Village, long conversations sitting on a park bench while watching the city move. Superficially, they seemed like two friends getting to know each other better, but there was an undercurrent of attraction that made every accidental touch, every prolonged glance, every shared laugh something charged with meaning. Julian discovered that Chloe was even more fascinating outside the club environment. Her intelligence revealed itself in sharp observations about politics, literature, philosophy. She made him laugh for the first time in years with her sarcastic humor about the ironies of urban life. More importantly, she challenged him intellectually in a way that no woman from his social circle ever had. There was no adulation or automatic agreement. Chloe debated with him as an equal, disagreed when she thought it necessary, forced him to reconsider opinions he had assumed as absolute truths. Chloe, in turn, discovered layers of complexity in Julian that contradicted the image of the cold businessman he projected publicly. He had a prodigious memory for Arabic poetry, which he would recite in intimate moments. He spoke with affection of his grandfathers who had emigrated from Lebanon with nothing but courage and determination. He revealed that he had considered leaving the business to become a literature professor before Eleanor died and family responsibility fell on his shoulders. The tension between them reached a breaking point one December night when they met for dinner at a small, discreet restaurant in Greenwich Village. The conversation flowed naturally about books, about the social projects Julian was reformulating based on the lessons learned from Chloe, about her plans to get a master's degree in cultural management. There was wine, low lights, the intimacy of two people who had learned to trust each other completely. "Can I ask you something personal?" Chloe said, nervously playing with her wine glass. "You can ask me anything," Julian replied, his amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel like the only person in the universe. "Do you still feel married? To her, I mean." "Eleanor?" The question caught him off guard. It was something he himself had been questioning in recent weeks, especially when he found himself thinking more about Chloe than about the memories of his dead wife. "I did," he answered honestly. "For 2 years, I felt like a part of me had died with her. But lately—" He paused, searching for words for feelings he was still learning to name. "Lately, I feel like I'm coming back to life. Because of me." The question came out more directly than Chloe intended, but the wine and the intimacy of the moment had lowered her usual defenses. Julian leaned forward, closing the distance between them. "Especially because of you." The moment stretched between them like a taut thread about to break. When Julian reached out to touch her face, Chloe didn't pull away. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, as if he were touching something precious and fragile. When their lips met, it was with the hesitation of two people who knew they were crossing a line that would change everything between them. The kiss started soft, exploratory, but quickly deepened as they both realized that the physical attraction they had been ignoring was even more intense than they had imagined. There were months of repressed tension in that kiss, weeks of meaningful glances and casual touches that were anything but casual. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "This complicates everything," Chloe murmured, her forehead resting against his. "I know," Julian replied, not pulling away. "But I can't pretend I don't feel this for you anymore." "Me neither," she admitted, sealing her own surrender to the feelings she had tried to deny for so long. They knew that from that moment on there was no going back. What had begun as mutual compassion had evolved into something much more dangerous. True love between two people from completely different worlds. A passion that challenged all the social and family conventions that governed their lives. And both were aware that the obstacles they would face would be far greater than anything they had imagined. The scandal erupted on social media one January morning like a carefully orchestrated bomb. Photographs of Julian and Chloe walking together in Central Park, dining at the restaurant in Greenwich Village, entering and leaving Mount Sinai Hospital during Sarah's treatment. The images, taken from angles that suggested intimacy without showing anything explicit, were accompanied by venomous captions that painted Chloe as an opportunist who had seduced New York's wealthiest widower. Bronx waitress snags, grieving Sheikh's heart and fortune, blared the headline of a high society gossip blog. The text that followed was a cruel dissection of Chloe's life, distorting every fact to build the narrative of an ambitious young woman who had used her family's tragedies to arouse the pity of a vulnerable man. They mentioned her origins in the Bronx as if it were a mark of disqualification, suggested that her work at the Elysian Club involved extra services for special clients, insinuated that her mother's hospitalization had been an elaborate scam to hook the businessman. Julian found out about the media exposure through Richard, his cousin and right-hand man in business, who burst into his office at 8 in the morning with a tablet in his hands and the expression of someone who had just seen a ghost. "You need to see this, and you need to explain to me what the hell is going on." As Julian read the post, he felt a fury growing in his chest like incandescent lava. It wasn't just for the invasion of privacy or the lies about Chloe. It was for the sudden understanding of who was behind this defamatory campaign. The photographs were too professional to be casual, the information too detailed to be the result of simple gossip. Someone had hired private investigators, someone with access to the inner circles of the Croft family. Confirmation of his suspicions came 2 hours later, when his mother, Isabella Croft, appeared in his office unannounced. A 65-year-old woman who maintained the elegance and authority of a traditional matriarch. Isabella had not set foot in her son's office since Eleanor's funeral. Her presence there could only mean one thing: a declaration of war. "This ends now," she said without preamble, throwing printed copies of the articles onto Julian's desk. "You will distance yourself from this woman immediately, and we will control the damage before your reputation, our reputation, is completely destroyed. It was you who had me followed. It wasn't a question, but a cold statement." Julian knew his mother well enough to recognize her hand behind this meticulously planned operation. "Of course it was me," Isabella replied without showing any embarrassment. "You have completely lost your mind. For 2 years I have respected your grief, but now you are dishonoring Eleanor's memory with this degrading affair." The argument that followed was brutal. Isabella did not mince words in describing exactly what she thought of Chloe, a gold digger who had taken advantage of her son's emotional vulnerability. She threatened to cut him off from the family inheritance, remove his name from the presidency of the companies, make him a persona non grata in their social circle. But her cruelest words were reserved to directly attack Julian's feelings. "Do you think this girl really cares about you? She saw a rich, lonely man and did exactly what any smart woman in her position would do. If you weren't who you are, if you were just an ordinary man with an ordinary salary, she wouldn't even look in your direction." Isabella's words planted seeds of doubt that Julian tried to ignore, but that grew like weeds in his mind in the hours that followed. Was there truth in the accusation? Had Chloe really fallen in love with him, or with the security he represented, the circumstances of their relationship, him paying for her mother's treatment, the expensive gifts he had started to give, the doors his influence could open in her life, created an imbalance that made it impossible to be certain about the authenticity of the feelings involved. While Julian wrestled with his own insecurities in his air-conditioned office, Chloe faced a much more direct storm on the streets of the Bronx. The articles had also reached her neighborhood, spread through WhatsApp, and commented on with the specific cruelty reserved for those who try to be better than others. Neighbors who had known her since childhood now looked at her with suspicion, some with poorly disguised envy, others with contempt for having betrayed her origins. "I always knew that girl was going to be trouble," commented Mr. Henderson, the owner of the corner bar, to anyone who would listen. "She studied too much, thought she was better than us. Now look at her, selling herself to the rich guys. The worst moment came when Chloe arrived home after a particularly difficult day at the club, where she had faced suspicious glances from colleagues and malicious comments from clients, and found her own mother crying in the kitchen with a phone in her hands. "My daughter, what have you done?" asked Sarah, her voice choked. "People are saying horrible things about you, that you got involved with this man for money, that you used my illness to—" "Mom, none of that is true," Chloe tried to explain, but she saw that the accusations had already planted doubts even in the heart of the woman who knew her best in the world. "I fell in love with him. For real. It has nothing to do with money. But honey, look at the difference between you. He's one of the richest men in the country. You're a waitress from the Bronx. How can this work out? How will people not think the worst?" The pain in Sarah's voice was like a stab to Chloe's heart. For the first time, she found herself questioning not only the viability of her relationship with Julian, but also whether she had been naive to believe that love could overcome such fundamental barriers of social class. The last straw came when even more compromising photos surfaced online. Images of their kiss at the restaurant, taken through the window by someone with a powerful lens. The captions were now even more aggressive. "Arab Sheikh forgets dead wife in the arms of an opportunist." The public humiliation became unbearable when Chloe arrived at the club and discovered that she had been fired to preserve the establishment's reputation. It was at this moment of total devastation that Chloe made the most difficult decision of her life. She could not continue to be the source of scandal and suffering for everyone around her, for Julian, whose reputation was being destroyed, for her mother, who was being attacked by association, for her family, who faced the cruel judgment of the community. If she truly loved Julian, the most loving thing she could do was to free him from the social prison their relationship had become. She wrote a letter that took hours to complete, each word heavy as lead. She explained that she had finally understood the impossibility of their situation, that she didn't want to be responsible for destroying his life or his relationship with his family. She mentioned that she had found a temporary job at a school in a small town upstate, where she would stay until the scandal died down. She ended by asking him to remember her fondly, but to move on and find someone from his own world, someone who could be by his side without causing conflict or embarrassment. Julian found the letter slipped under his apartment door on a Friday night, as he was returning from another exhausting day trying to control the damage from the media scandal. He read it once in silence, then once more aloud, as if speaking the words could change their meaning. When the reality of her abandonment fully hit him, he felt something break inside his chest, not the dull, constant ache he had experienced after Eleanor's death, but something sharp and desperate, as if he had lost not only the woman he loved, but also the possibility of ever being happy again. He spent 3 days drunk and 3 nights sleepless, alternating between fury and despair. Richard tried to convince him that Chloe's departure was for the best, that now he could focus on rebuilding his reputation and perhaps consider the marriage his family had arranged with Sophia, a young doctor from a Syrian family who would be suitable in every way. Isabella appeared with flowers and the triumphant air of someone who had won an important battle, but it was precisely his mother's satisfaction that awakened Julian from his self-destructive stupor. Seeing her there, proud to have destroyed the only genuine relationship he had had in his adult life, he understood that the time had come to choose definitively between family expectations and his own happiness. The epiphany came on a rainy Tuesday, when Julian found himself once again at the cemetery in front of Eleanor's grave. But this time, it wasn't to ask for forgiveness or cry over imaginary guilt. It was to have a final conversation with the woman he had loved, to say goodbye completely to the past before fighting for the future. "I know you would approve of her," he said in a low voice to the marble headstone. "Chloe has the same kindness you had, the same strength. And I know you wouldn't want me to live the rest of my life alone just to honor your memory. You taught me that loving means wanting the other person's happiness, even when it means letting go." It was there, kneeling on the damp earth between the ancient trees, that Julian finally understood that honoring Eleanor's memory didn't mean remaining trapped in the past, but using the lessons she had taught him about love and compassion to build a new happiness. The search for Chloe took 3 weeks and all the investigative resources his money could buy. She had taken refuge in a small town in upstate New York, where she was working as a substitute teacher in a public school, while trying to rebuild her life away from the scandal's spotlight. When Julian finally found her, on a sunny afternoon in a small square surrounded by flowering trees, she was sitting on a bench, reading a book to a class of school children. Seeing her there, surrounded by children hanging on every word of the story she told, made Julian understand exactly why he had fallen in love with her. It wasn't just her natural beauty or her brilliant intelligence. It was the way she radiated light, how she transformed any environment into a warmer, more welcoming place, simply by being there. When the children left and they were alone in the square, there was a moment of hesitation on both sides. Chloe had lost weight. There were shadows under her eyes that betrayed sleepless nights, but her posture remained proud, dignified, even in adversity. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly, without getting up from the bench. "I had to come," Julian replied, sitting beside her but keeping a respectful distance. "Because I made a terrible mistake. I let other people's opinions be more important than my own feelings. I let you face everything alone when I should have been by your side from the very first moment." Chloe shook her head, tears shining in her eyes. "It's not about that, Julian. It's about reality. We're from worlds that are too different. Your family is right. I'll never be accepted in your circle, and you'll never be completely happy living on the fringes of the society that has always been your home. My home is wherever you are," he said with a simplicity that cut through all the complications and analyses. "And as for my family, I've already made my decision. I've cut ties with those who organized that campaign against you. I've restructured my businesses to be independent of the family money. It's not about them approving of you. It's about me choosing you every day for the rest of my life." What followed was a conversation that lasted until sunset, where they both laid all their cards on the table. Julian told her about the weeks of despair after she left, about how he had finally understood that loving Chloe didn't diminish the love he had felt for Eleanor, but expanded it. Chloe spoke of the fears that had led her to flee, of how she had fought the temptation to return to him every day. When he asked her to come back, he didn't offer easy promises about how everything would be perfect. Instead, he was honest about the challenges they would face, the prejudices that would persist, the difficulties of building a life together across social barriers, the need to create their own space in the world where they could be happy on their own terms. "It won't be easy," Julian admitted, "but nothing worthwhile is ever easy, and you are worth fighting through every difficulty that will come." The wedding took place 6 months later, in a ceremony that mixed Arabic and American traditions at a country estate Julian had bought specifically for the event. It was small but meaningful, attended only by people who truly supported their union. Some members of the Al-Rashid family who had chosen love over prejudice, true friends from both sides, and Chloe's entire family who finally understood that their daughter had found not just a husband, but a partner who valued her exactly as she was. Sarah, fully recovered thanks to the treatment Julian had provided, was the one who walked Chloe down the aisle. Mrs. Davies, the woman Julian had met in the Bronx, was one of the bridesmaids, now an employee of the revamped foundation that he and Chloe managed together, focused on education and real opportunities for young people from underprivileged communities. During the vows, when Julian looked into Chloe's eyes and promised to love her for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, in days of glory and in moments of adversity, he understood that he had found something he didn't know he was looking for, a partner who challenged him to be the best version of himself. Someone who loved him, not despite his imperfections, but including them. Chloe, in turn, promised to walk beside you as an equal, to build with you not just a family, but a legacy of love that transforms the world around us. Her words echoed through the country estate as a declaration of independence from all the conventions that had tried to separate them. The epilogue of their story was written in the years that followed. Together, they transformed the Croft Foundation into one of the most respected non-governmental organizations in the country, creating programs that offered quality education and real opportunities for young people from disadvantaged communities. Chloe completed her master's in cultural management while coordinating projects that brought art and literature to the outer boroughs. Julian discovered that using his wealth and influence to create real social change was infinitely more satisfying than simply accumulating more money. 3 years after the wedding, when their first child was born, a boy with amber eyes like his father and a determined smile like his mother, they knew they had managed to create something beautiful and lasting, a family based on true love, mutual respect, and the certainty that the differences the world sees as obstacles can become, in the right hands, the foundation for building something extraordinary. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a score from 0 to 10. And thank you very much.